God puts us in nations, in places, not by mistake, but to do a job. What if we opened our eyes to the needs of our colleagues, of our leaders, of our subordinates, and we were a priest on their behalf? Welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. My name is Lyn Johnson.
And I'm Lyn Johnson.
And we're going to be talking about how to get our business into God's business. Our subtext is Let My Business Go, and we'll have guests from around the world. So thank you for joining us this week and every week on the Repurposing Business Podcast. Welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. My name is Lyn Johnson.
And I'm Lyn Johnson.
And we're going to be sharing with you every week on stories about God and business, and particularly how do you get your business into God's business. We'll also pick up topics that are relevant to today. We're living in a unique time.
Yes.
And so there are opportunities for business people, but also challenges. Mm-hmm. How do we actually use this time of reset, this time of pause, to think about what is the maximum that we can do with our business to extend the kingdom of God? Now, this is nothing new to us. We actually started out our lives in South Africa.
A long, long time ago.
And let's go back a little bit and tell you some of that story about where our passion for the marketplace was born. It didn't actually come out of some grand revelation, but out of a practical reality. Yes. So Lyn and I met in our teens. And
we actually met when we were about 7.
That's true.
But got to know each other a bit more when we were teens.
That's true. That's right. Met when we were 7, but when I'd finished my military service, then started attending a youth group that Lyn was running, and we got involved in that together. We led a Sunday school together and ended up working with Youth for Christ for quite a while. And then were involved in a local church, a wonderful local church, and ended up leading that local church. So now we were leading the local church. We'd been involved with youth and so on. But I was still working at Pricewaterhouse. What were you doing?
I was teaching at the time, commuting to Fishhook in Cape Town.
Yeah. So Lyn had been a teacher for some years. I was at Pricewaterhouse. I had studied chartered accountancy and was dealing with some of their big clients in South Africa. And so this question came up as we began to lead the church. Well, Brett, when are you going to go full-time?
Full-time.
Yeah.
And he was very full-time with a lot on his plate.
So I had 2 full-time jobs already. And, this notion of somebody being full-time or part-time in the kingdom of God is actually not, well, it's not true. It's nonsense, in fact. Yeah. And we began to see that the men and women who were in our church, teachers, engineers, business people, that they had gifts that were useful to the kingdom of God. So to make matters worse, we then actually, or better.
Yeah, I was going to say not worse.
We got involved with Youth with a Mission, a missions organization. And as was true of many missions organizations, still today even, when they approach business people, they're normally looking for money or somebody to be on their board, which equates often to giving counsel or raising money. In reality, as we worked with a good friend, Ian Muir, who was heading up YWAM in South Africa, we realized that what they actually needed was people we had in our church.
Yes.
They needed IT,
accountants,
finance.
Different people with business skills. That's right.
Exactly, yeah. So these people were sitting in our church and actually they were underdeployed. So even though we were business people leading the local church, most of the business people in our church were underutilized from a kingdom of God perspective, not from a local church. We can kind of keep people busy. But these people had great skills at IT, business strategy, finance that could be used to extend the kingdom of God. So we developed a passion to mobilize these people and help them use their business skills to advance the kingdom of God.
And that brings about a lot of satisfaction for people as well, because they're like, I spent so much time at work. I'm so thrilled that these skills can actually be used to advance the kingdom.
Yeah, I should just mention in passing over here that the Hebrew word for business and for ministry is the same word.
And that fact is quite shocking when people hear that.
Yeah. So when people say that, are you doing ministry or are you doing business? From a Hebrew perspective, that's actually a crazy idea because these are one thing.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting, of course, is the word for work and for worship is the same thing. So when people went to work, it's the same as going to worship. They're going to do business. They're going to do ministry. So
holistic, isn't it?
It is. So let's fast forward. Back in 1986, Pricewaterhouse decided I should go to the States for just 1 year. So we put everything in storage. Lyn sorted everything into boxes, made lists and so on.
With a 7-month-old and a 3-year-old. It was quite an adventure.
It was quite exciting to just go for 1 year.
1 year. I can do this for 1 year. This is wonderful. Go to the US for a year.
So it was like a great vacation, and we ended up flying to San Francisco. The problem was that as the plane landed in San Francisco, God said to me, this is going to be your home for quite a while.
And you never know with God what quite a while actually means.
Yeah, so we began to ask God, and it was actually quite an agonizing journey. It's easy to look back now and say, yeah, this is what happened. But I remember sort of mourning the fact that I was no longer leading a local church.
And I was very sad because my parents, my sister, my family, it was all still in South Africa. It was very difficult to leave.
Yeah, so we didn't know anybody really. And so we started from scratch, but began to ask God diligently, so why do you want us in America? And after a while, through a variety of different things, he said, I want you to start an organization that will put together in an integrated way these worlds of business, mission, and local church in a new kind of organization.
Yes.
And back then, this wasn't very popular.
No, people weren't talking about this at all. This was a totally new idea.
Certainly, people in the marketplace had done evangelism things. And typically what happened, you'd have a businessman's breakfast. No women.
No. Don't get me started on that one.
Yeah, but typically just business guys got together and somebody who'd been successful talked about how they became successful and now they were a Christian. And but there wasn't much talking about how do you fully integrate your work and faith from the beginning, not how do you get successful and then do something meaningful later. Yeah. So this was a passion of ours. And another thing, if I had to talk about a passion, it's the abolition of dichotomy, this notion that some things are spiritual and some things are not spiritual. Some things are secular, some things are sacred. So
and that whole view pervades so many aspects of the church, and historically it's been around and it still exists now.
Still exists, even all of this language about kings and priests and yada yada. And nowadays talking about things like the 7 mountains, what we tend to do is simply relocate dichotomy from one place to another. And as long as we do that, the devil is very happy. But as soon as we try to figure out how do I fully integrate my business and my mission, my calling, my work, my vocation, my avocation, how do I put those things together fully? And it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. It is quite a struggle and raises all sorts of questions. And I think sometimes for someone who owns their own business, it might be a little bit easier because they have a sense of what the purpose is. But what do you do when you work for somebody else? And lots of questions are raised. And these are some of the things we've talked about and thought through the years and discussed with people.
For some people, the answer is balance. Well, if I can just balance my home life, my work life, my church life, my social life, and so on. But the concept of balance, I think, is bogus. And we'll talk a bit about that on the next session. And, of course, I've written about that in my book, Convergence. But the reality is it's harder to live an integrated life than sort of balancing different things. So
it's harder in the short term, but in the long term, it's better.
In the long term, it's seamless, right? Yeah. In fact, we were chatting with some friends recently, and he came through our Repurposing Business Executive Intensive, went back, and he fully embraced this notion of living an integrated life. And they said to us recently, we have so much more time. We have more margin, and we'll talk about margin in our next session. Yeah. So in the long term, you're quite right. Yeah. It's actually because you have a seamless flow between business, ministry. And so, I remember a guy came to me once and booked a 45-minute appointment to answer the question, Brett, how did you feel when you left the ministry? Do you remember that? And I said to him, I didn't. I never left the ministry.
Now you can go home.
So that was a quick session. Yeah. But actually getting our heads around that. So we'll be talking about these things, and we'll have other people joining us, right?
Yeah, I'm excited about the guests that we're going to have on this podcast, because through the years, we have met with and spent time with and have relationship with and have a community of such amazing, amazing people. I like to say we just get the cream of the crop, and it really is true. And so it's going to be exciting to be able to interview people who live in different parts of the world, different generations, who've been thinking this through. So we're going to have other guests with us on the podcast. It won't just be us.
Yeah. In fact, one of our first guests is going to be a millennial.
A beautiful millennial.
Yeah. So just to hear from them, hear their perspectives. And so we'll have people from different generations.
Yes.
So this isn't going to be a bunch of old people telling you stories.
Phew,
right?
that's a relief. Because we have lots of stories, although we wouldn't think of ourselves as old people. But
yeah, but the camera said thinks we are.
Yeah.
And so we will be sharing stories, inviting people on here, which will be fantastic. And these people are from CEOs to worker level people, because it's one thing to just get the quote unquote successful people in. But actually everybody's struggling on this journey, trying to work stuff out. And, some years ago, I was starting a discipleship program. And as I put this thing together, I felt God say two things. Brett, business people don't care about theology. Now, actually, they care about truth lived out, practice. But what they really want to know is, I'm a merchant banker. Is there somebody else in finance who's been through what I've been through and were they successful? I'm in retail sales. Do you have another company that's been through this thing? And one of the things that's been a tremendous blessing for us is that we've worked with so many different industries. There's barely an industry we haven't worked with.
Yeah, so it's almost 400 companies that we've worked with now.
Over 400 companies we've worked with. And from
lots of different industries.
Lots of industries. So when we encounter a problem, we can say, I remember that guy in Indonesia or this person in India, in Nigeria, Zimbabwe, South Africa, wherever, that's actually encountered that same situation. And this is what God did for them.
And then you have the power of the testimony. It's amazing to be able to share. And then people go, wow, well, if God did that for them, I can ask him to do the same thing for me in my situation. There's great power in that.
Some stories, when they're shared, are kind of evangelistic. In other words, they stretch, and there weren't 50 people there were 500 people there. Or I find actually the bigger problem is that we forget what God has done. And so God tells us, remember. Yeah. So one of the things we started doing from one of our earliest business missions combined trips in 2003 into Cape Town was actually recording marketplace miracles. So we have a form, and perhaps it was the old auditor in me. But we said, what's the current situation? What was the issue? What was the miracle that God did? How do we measure it? And the client signs it. And so we've kept track of these marketplace miracles. Certainly not all of them, but we have a compendium of hundreds of marketplace miracles. And the point is not just that we have a list of those things, but when we encounter somebody in an industry, in a business, we can say, God's been there before. And
then you took a whole lot of those and put them into the extraordinary book. Yes. I don't think many of our friends have actually even know about that, but story after story after story in that.
Yeah, it was quite a gut-wrenching thing, because I got to actually see a lot of my failures along the way. Gee, I could have done that better. In Johannesburg, we could have done this differently. In India, we could have done that differently. So if you're starting out with something in the marketplace, there's a lot of good lessons there. And that book is x-ordinary.com. And it'll take you to the Apple Store or elsewhere where you can find that. Lots of stories, including photographs, videos, hearing firsthand from the people. Yeah. One of the other questions people sometimes ask me is, Brett, does this stuff really work? And we actually made an early determination, and this is just part of our journey. We could either go to the Christian conferences and we could talk about it, or we could do it. We did not have time to do both. So we opted for the doing. And so from 2003, we've been taking teams out to the nations to work with business people, to help them think through the principles of work-faith integration. And we have captured those stories from over the years. And so now we're pleased to begin sharing those stories with you.
Yeah, and not just sharing the stories. Those people that we met when we went to India, Indonesia, different parts of Africa, the US, they're now part of our Repurposing Business community around the world. And so sharing the stories, but I think we also want to share the people with you because they're part of our community. And that's what's so wonderful, that we can actually draw on others as well.
Great. So that's what we'll be doing in these podcasts. We'll be bringing the stories of people from around the world. When God said to me, workplace people don't care about theology, they want to know practical truth.
Yeah.
What is a practical thing I can do in this situation? So we won't be bringing you lots of theory, although we do have some good frameworks and so on.
Yeah.
We'll actually be sharing the practical stories and then helping you think through practical application in your situation.
And looking at it in this current situation of what's happening right now. So that's also why we felt an urgency to get this podcast series going, because we know that people are asking big questions right now. And we want to be able to gather, to be able to think that through as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we think this is timely, and we look forward to you joining us on the Repurposing Business podcasts. If you want to track along with blog posts, every now and then we do blogs, we put out devotionals, we share additional stories, and those are at brettjohnson.biz.
And share that with others, brettjohnson.biz. I'm happy to share it.
Yeah, so that's what we'll be doing. So go to brettjohnson.biz. You'll find some additional resources there. And as we go along, if there's an article that's been written, there's a book review, there's a good news story, there's an interview, we'll be posting that for you so that you can track along. You can be encouraged and enriched by the stories, the life, the testimonies of other people. So thank you for joining us. It's been a delight to have you. And we look forward to having you as a regular friend on the Repurposing Business podcast.
Goodbye. Thanks for joining.